I was the only person who showed up for my husband's funeral. A whole row of empty pews stretched out before me as I stood next to Jeremiah's mahogany casket. Our children, Callan with his wife and Anaya, had chosen cruises and trips instead of giving a final farewell to the man who raised them. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories travel. The funeral home director, a young man who looked like he'd just graduated, seemed more awkward than I was as he glanced at the vacant seats. It was a gray, typical October Monday in Atlanta, Georgia, when the sky couldn't decide whether to rain or just threaten. Jeremiah always hated indecision. "Mrs. Hampton, would you like to wait a few more minutes?" he asked, discreetly checking his watch. "We can start," I replied. My voice was firmer than I expected. Jeremiah hated delays. The pastor, a man who never knew my husband in life, began reciting generic words about a good man and cherished memories, while I fixed my eyes on the arrangement of white lilies atop the casket. Jeremiah would have preferred something simpler, maybe just the deep red roses from our backyard, the ones he faithfully pruned for 43 years. I sat alone in the front row. 5 empty chairs surrounding me screamed louder than any eulogy. Our 2 children, their spouses, our grandson Damani, not one of them present. Kaylin had sent a text message the night before. "Sorry, Mom, big meeting in Miami. Can't reschedule. I'll call you next week." No further explanations, no attempt to shift his schedule to say goodbye to his own father. I pictured him sitting in some expensive conference room, occasionally checking the time, vaguely thinking about the funeral happening 1,000 miles away. Anaya was worse. She didn't even send a text. Her assistant called to say Anaya was indisposed and couldn't travel. Indisposed, as if we were talking about Sunday dinner, not the final goodbye to the man who carried her on his shoulders throughout her childhood. When the brief service ended, I followed the casket to the graveyard. The cold wind bit at my face, but I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't grieving, but because I'd cried so much over the last few weeks that I seemed to be fresh out of tears. The casket settled into the earth, and I tossed a handful of dirt onto it. The dirt hit the wood with a hollow sound, like the echo of my footsteps in the now empty house. I returned home, the same house where we raised our kids, where Jeremiah and I built a life for almost 5 decades. His house slippers were still next to his recliner. The TV remote was positioned exactly where he'd left it. The silence was deafening. I poured myself a glass of the good bourbon we saved for special occasions. This wasn't special, but it felt appropriate. I picked up my phone, and driven by an impulse I couldn't control, I opened Instagram. Anaya's profile was first on my feed. She had posted 3 hours earlier, exactly when her father's funeral was taking place. It was a photo on a yacht, champagne glasses raised high, a radiant smile. The caption read, "Livin' my best life." I swallowed hard. My daughter wasn't indisposed. She was on a yacht celebrating while I buried her father. I kept scrolling. Kaylin had also posted a selfie in a conference room with a caption about closing major deals and making worthwhile connections. No mention of his father, not a word about grief, as if this were just another ordinary day. I switched off the phone and took a long sip of the bourbon. On the wall in front of me was a photo of us on our 40th wedding anniversary. Jeremiah and I were smiling, holding hands in front of the rose bushes he planted when we moved into this house. They were blooming a vibrant red in that photo. Now, like him, they were withering. "Tomorrow," I decided out loud, "I'm calling Attorney Owens." Attorney Owens had been our lawyer for over 3 decades. He'd drafted our will just 2 years ago when everything seemed simple and fair, half to Kaylin, half to Anaya, with a small portion reserved for Damani, our only grandchild. The house for both of them to sell or decide between. The mountain cabin for them to enjoy as a family. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, the very spot where Jeremiah used to make breakfast every Sunday without fail. He always made extra pancakes for the kids, even years after they'd moved out. "You never know when they might show up," he'd say with a hopeful smile. They rarely showed, only when they needed something. I opened the desk drawer where we kept our important documents. I ran my fingers over the organized envelopes, bills, deeds, insurance policies, until I found the brown folder labeled Last Will and Testament. Inside, the document Jeremiah and I had signed 2 years ago now seemed like a relic from another time, a time when we still believed our children cared about us, a time when duty and love still seemed to be the same thing. I closed the folder and went to our bedroom. Jeremiah's pills were still on the nightstand. The doctor had said it would be fast, but it wasn't. It was 6 months of slow decline, of hospital visits, of hope followed by despair. 6 months during which Kaylin visited 2 times and Anaya only once, always with ready excuses about work, kids, commitments. When Jeremiah finally passed, it was a regular Tuesday morning. I was holding his hand. He opened his eyes, smiled slightly, and said, "You were always the best part of me, Eliza." And then he was gone. I called the kids immediately. Kaylin said he'd come for the weekend. Anaya promised to take the first available flight. Neither of them followed through. The next morning, I called Attorney Owens. His secretary answered, and hearing my voice, her tone changed. "Ms. Hampton, my deepest condolences. We just heard about Mr. Jeremiah." "Thank you, Shonda. I need to schedule an appointment with the attorney. It's urgent." "He has an opening tomorrow at 10 a.m. Does that work?" "Perfect." I slept poorly that night, not because of the decision I'd made, but in spite of it. For the first time in weeks, I felt I had a purpose, a clarity. It was as if Jeremiah was by my side, nodding in silent approval. Attorney Owens' office smelled of old books and fresh brewed coffee. He stood up when I entered, his face expressing sincere condolences. "Eliza, it's good to see you. I'm so sorry about Jeremiah. He was an extraordinary man." "Thank you, attorney. He truly was." I sat in the leather chair opposite his desk. "I need to modify our will." He nodded, unsurprised. Many widows and widowers came through here with the same request. "I understand. Are you looking to make specific revisions?" "I want to remove Kaylin and Anaya completely." This surprised him. He slowly removed his glasses. "Completely? Everything?" "I want everything. The house, the cabin, the accounts, the investments, to go to Damani." "Your grandson?" "Yes." Attorney Owens cleared his throat. "Eliza, I know this is a difficult time, but decisions made during grief can be—" "I buried Jeremiah alone," I interrupted. My voice was calm but firm. Neither of our children attended the funeral. Anaya was on a yacht celebrating with friends. Kaylin was in a business meeting he could have easily rescheduled. Meanwhile, Damani called every day during his grandfather's illness. He was the one who mowed our lawn when Jeremiah got sick. He was the one who drove me to the hospital on nights when I couldn't drive myself. He's only 22 years old, but he has more character than both his parents combined. Attorney Owens was silent for a moment. "I understand," he finally said. "We'll prepare the new documents. I should inform you that your children can contest this decision after your passing." "They can try, but I want it structured in the safest way possible, a trust for Damani that his parents cannot touch." "That can be arranged." He made some notes. "Do you want to establish any conditions for Damani's access to the funds?" "Just that he can't access all of it at once until he turns 30, except for education or medical emergencies." "That's sensible for a young man." Attorney Owens nodded. "I'll have everything ready for your signature by the end of the week." Leaving the office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was honoring Jeremiah's memory in the only way I had left, ensuring his legacy went to someone who truly valued him. I walked slowly to the car, observing the people on the street. A mother and a little girl passed by, both laughing at some private joke. I didn't feel envy, just a quiet understanding that family ties are more complicated than they look in Christmas photos. That night, for the first time since Jeremiah died, I didn't wear his old sweater to bed. I lay in our bed, now my bed, and let the silence envelop me. It was no longer a painful silence, but a peaceful one. Jeremiah used to say, "True love doesn't need recognition, but it deserves respect." Our children had forgotten that lesson, But I hadn't. The papers were signed on a cloudy Thursday. Attorney Owens watched me as I passed the pen over the dotted lines with quiet determination. I didn't hesitate once. When you bury your husband alone while your children post selfies with champagne, legal documents stop being intimidating. "It's done," Attorney Owens said, gathering the papers. "The process will be discreet, but I must warn you, at some point, Kalon and Anaya will find out." "I know," I replied, putting my pen back in my purse. "And when they find out, let them hear it from me." Leaving the office, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Not joy or revenge, just a removed weight. The weight of trying to keep an illusion alive. The illusion that my children were still the people Jeremiah and I dreamed they would be. Back home, I opened a closet I hadn't touched in months. Inside were boxes organized by year, each containing checks, bank statements, and receipts. A meticulous accounting, not just of money, but of the unilateral generosity that marked my relationship with my children for decades. I pulled out the folder marked Kalon, Business and Education. Inside was a collection of expenses that totaled more than what many people earn in a lifetime. The tuition for his MBA at a fancy out-of-state university, the $70,000 for the initial investment in his first business that failed in less than a year, the $10,000 for the down payment on the McMansion he needed to impress clients, the imported car to keep up appearances. With every request, Jeremiah would frown, but eventually give in. "He's our son," he'd say. "One day he'll learn." That day never came. Anaya's folder was equally revealing. The extravagant wedding that cost the equivalent of a small condo, the renovations on the penthouse she deserved after so much work, the vacations to the Maldives to recover from stress, the private school for her son, which was absolutely necessary for his future. Every request came with the implicit promise of more visits, more calls, more connection, promises that dissolved as soon as the money was wired. What struck me now, looking at those folders, wasn't the sheer dollar amount, but the pattern. There was never genuine gratitude, just a constant expectation that we would always be there to help, as if our money, earned from decades of hard work and saving, was somehow part of their early inheritance. I closed the folders and put them back in the cabinet, not out of remorse, but to keep them as evidence, not for a court of law, but for my own heart. The phone rang at 7:32 p.m. that night. Damani's name flashed on the screen. "Grandma, can I stop by tomorrow? I found some books Grandpa would have liked, and well, I wanted to show you." I felt a lump in my throat. "Of course, baby. Come for lunch." The next day, I made lasagna, Jeremiah's favorite. Damani arrived promptly at noon, carrying a canvas bag of used books and his grandpa's same gentle smile. We ate in the backyard, talking about simple things. He told me about college, his part-time job at a bookstore, his plans for graduate school. He spoke with enthusiasm, but without the frantic ambition that always characterized his parents. "You know," he said, serving himself more salad, "sometimes I think about how Grandpa approached life. He always said success wasn't about having a lot, but about needing little." I smiled. Those were Jeremiah's exact words. "Your grandfather would be proud of you, Damani." "You really think so?" There was a vulnerability in his voice that reminded me of him as a child, always seeking approval, never demanding it. "I'm sure of it." After lunch, he insisted on doing the dishes. As he dried the plates, he mentioned he was thinking of applying for a research program in African American literature, but he was worried about the cost. "How much is it?" I asked casually. He named a sum that was less than 1/10 of what his father had requested for his latest investment. "Apply," I replied simply. "But Grandma, it's expensive, and I know—" I interrupted gently. "Who do you think your grandfather and I saved all our lives for?" He fell silent, polishing an already dry plate. "For moments like this," I continued, "to help people who truly value the opportunity." When he left, carrying the leftover lasagna I insisted he take, I stood at the door, watching his beat-up sedan pull away. The contrast between him and his parents couldn't have been clearer. Anaya called the next day. It was the first time I'd heard her voice since the funeral she hadn't attended. "Mom," her voice sounded irritated. "Damani told me you're paying for his research scholarship." "No, hello. No, how are you?" Straight to the money. "Good morning to you too, Anaya." "I'm sorry," she said, not sounding truly apologetic. "I'm just worried. You just lost Dad. You shouldn't be making major financial decisions right now." I took a deep breath. "Actually, I've made several important financial decisions recently." "What? What kind of decisions?" The worry in her voice wasn't about me, but about the potential impact on her inheritance. "Why don't you come visit me? We can talk in person." There was a pause. "I'm really busy with work, Mom. You know how it is." "Yes, I know exactly how it is." My voice was quiet. "It was the same reason you couldn't make it to your father's funeral while you were on a yacht with champagne." Silence on the other end. "How did you know?" "Instagram. Anaya. You posted photos during your father's burial." Another silence, followed by a rushed explanation. "Mom, that was complicated. I was going through a lot emotionally and—" "Spare me the details," I interrupted. "Come see me if you want to talk. Otherwise, I'll assume you're too busy, as usual." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from relief. Decades of swallowing my words, of looking the other way, of excusing the inexcusable. Finally, over. Kalan showed up the next day without warning, as he always did when he wanted something. His imported car pulled into the driveway with that showy flourish that always made me uncomfortable. "Mom," he hugged me briefly. "Are you okay? You look tired." "I'm fine, Kalan. What brings you here?" He looked around as if evaluating the house. "Anaya told me about your conversation. We're worried about you." "Are you?" "Of course," he said, sitting on the sofa. The same sofa